You have questions, we have answers. This is Jane Muller.
And this is Ken Muller. Welcome to our show, all about real estate with Ken and Jane. Today, Jane, we're going to cover what's next. We always get that question from the sellers. You know, from the time they sign the listing agreement, you know, they want to know the steps in the whole process. A lot of people, when they list their house for sale, they haven't done so. It's not something they do routinely. For most cases, they could be living in the house for 20, 30 years or longer. So for them, it's an entirely new process. I mean, as agents, we do it all the time. You think, oh, everything is so obvious, but for most homeowners, the whole process is new, it's exciting, it's scary, it's got all these emotions attached to it. So they always say, what's next? They want to know what's next. So we've covered a lot of detailed shows on all the components of the process. So we thought this show we would devote to trying to get everything covered in an outline format to cover at least each step as, you know, briefly, you know, as to some detail as time permits, but at least go through the steps from listing the home to the photos, to the MLS, to the showing time, the lockbox, the offers, the attorney review, etc. So we're going to get through to the day of the closing and then the post-closing. That's the goal of this show today, is to go through those steps. So that way in the 28 minutes we have, that people have a recording and they have a general process. I guess the best way would be to call it a process flow chart of the steps.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Because as you said, Ken, we went through a lot of details in each previous show. Each component, we went deep in each topic. But sometimes it's always good for our client and the listener out there to know overview, so they know where each components come together.
Correct, right. Yes. So once the listing agreement is signed, basically then they've appointed the brokerage, the designated broker as the exclusive, you know, typically the exclusive agent to sell the house. Mm-hmm. Then typically what would be the next step that the list agent would do to get the house ready to put on the market, the marketing step, right?
Yeah, normally, generally speaking, as soon as the listing signed, most listing today with a residential is a standard multiple listing system. So regardless which company you hire, the paperwork is pretty much standard from the either MLS multiple listing system or from the company, or from the Realtors Association, but mostly it's from multiple listing system. Yeah.
Right. And with the paperwork, one of the most important things is is to get the owner, if possible, to do a seller disclosure. Because typically when anybody's making an offer on the house, they're going to want to review the seller disclosure, which again is a standard listing document that has standard questions about the age of the home, the age of the roof, how long they've lived there, the age of the plumbing, any upgrades, any permits, et cetera. Are they aware of any environmental issues? So that's an important document. So that, I think, would be one of the important things to do with the list documents. So let's go on to the next step. Once the listing documents are ready, before you can put the house on the market, typically you want the photos.
Yes, we want photos. And one step back, Ken, even this overview, right? Sometimes the before the listing sign or after listing sign depends on each listing agent and the sellers, right? They always discuss how they get a home ready. Right. So the home has to be prepared. And we had the one episode for that, how to prepare your home. So before, and basically you have to make the home as the best as possible. If there's a maintenance issue, if there's small touch up, you should get it done so the home show the best way. And also we schedule for the photo. So the photo, we did a special program for the photo as well. So yeah, the photo is very important. That's going to be online. So most of the people, they want to see it before they decided either they come or not. So the photo absolutely is very important part of it. And with the photo, and we make sure please don't park your car on the driveway, and remove all the stuffs, if possible. And once again, to remove the personal family photos, and so your personal information not going to float on the internet. So that's a common sense knowledge. So after photo is done, we will put a home on the market. That's exciting time, right?
That's an exciting time. And then with putting a house on the market, though, you've got to then basically, you get to the next question. Obviously, typically most homes, if it's allowable, you put a for sale sign on the property, assuming the owner is okay with it. And if there's, as long as the association, if it's an association, they allow it, or it's some certain associations disallow that. Certain adult communities don't allow that. But typically you want to put a sign on that property. It's going to be on the market, so it gets the internet exposure. But then the whole process comes with the showings. And then with the showings, comes the accessibility aspect of. So with showings, you can either have the lockbox issue. So you want to talk about the
some owner prefer to have a lockbox, give the flexibility. Some owner prefer not, and we did previously a session just about lockbox as well. So that's really personal preference. The only thing I want to make it sure the listeners understand is the lockbox is really for the owner to get a flexibility. Say, for example, if you have a showing scheduled and you already had other arrangements, so you don't have to wait for the buyer agent to come. Sometimes they on the traffic, or sometimes they got delayed, so that's more flexible for the owner. Or if you're at work and if someone just want to show with a short notice, if obviously the home is in showable status, right? And if you have a lockbox on, that's going to be helpful too. Yeah, make it more available to the buyer. Once again, the more buyer, the more showing equal more opportunities for the seller.
Right. And then the next step, but obviously once you have the accessibility worked out, you have to then arrange how the owner has to know how the home is going to be scheduled for the showings. Like typically we use a showing time and appointment center. So a licensed agents call in the appointment, the designated showing time number. They give their credentials. They get logged in. They put in a request for a date and time they want to show the property. And then the showing time representative either texts or communicates with the seller in the preferred way that the seller has designated, whether it be a text or a phone call saying that's, John Smith, the buyer agent of RE/MAX wants to show your home Sunday between 1 and 2 p.m. And
one thing I want to share, right? And one of our clients said, I as a leasing agent, always ask the seller their preference, call, text, and email, or any combination, or all of them, right? One seller said, you can call me because sometimes text, I don't have habit. I'm retired. I don't read the text as often as otherwise. So email is good, but I don't check email. I mean, maybe not as often either, right? So we put it at a call. As soon as the home hit the market, that was like a year ago when it was really, really hot market. As soon as put on the market, the phone just keep being, phone calls keep coming. At the end, she said, please stop. I just want to text. I now understand why, I said, better just don't have a text. Otherwise, your phone keep ringing. And especially you're driving or anything, you're going to interrupt. She said, no, I'm okay. But after the house went on the market, half an hour, she called me. She said, please stop it. You were right. So.
Right. Yeah. And then the seller should understand too that there's different ways that they could have the agents request showings whenever their client wants to see the house, or they could provide designated time slots and days. So that all depends. Obviously, the more accommodating the sellers are to the showing request, the better. The more marketing for the house. But some sellers may have situations where they only want showings on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the weekends. For designated time slots. So it all depends. But that's up to the seller to decide and the list agent to decide.
That's correct. And especially now a lot of people still working from home. So they have a meeting. So certain time we can block it. And if people have pets and young kids like a nap, so we always make consideration and helping the seller to structure as effective as possible.
Right. So we talked about showings would be when an individual agent has a client that they want to show your particular home. That's one of the marketing in-person ways to show it. There's another component, the open house. Open houses
just before that, even for the private showing, right? Sometimes the seller get confused. They said, you're not coming? Who's coming? And when individual showing is buyer agent company, they are buyer. It's not the listing agent to be there. And it's a buyer agent, they're licensed realtor, and they come with their client. And we talk about either the lockbox or the seller provide access. So the licensing agent will be there with the buyer. It's not the unsupervised running around the house. No, the agent is there with them.
While we're on the topic about showings, then the sellers would often ask, we get this question a lot of times too, can I be home for the showing or do I have to leave the house? So how do you handle that?
That's really depends, right? I would say if it's raining or snowing or anything, right, stay home, that's okay. But do not follow them. Maybe just sit outside or sit somewhere and read and do something. But if you can, better not home because the buyer and buyer agent come, and if they by themselves, they have a more privacy, so they can discuss more open, and they can, see the home without any worries. If the seller there, they sometimes, it's going to affect buyers, the experience.
Okay, and here's another question since we're on the showing process, the experience. Oftentimes sellers will ask us, what condition does my house have to be in photo-ready condition for each and every time there's a showing? And how would you answer that?
I think in that case, I would say do as well as possible. Photo is different. Photo, that day we had a much higher requirement, but because that's a photo, is there forever. But if they for the showing, as long as clean, as long as once again put away your valuables, that's very important. And as long as I would say at what level, right? People say, what level my house ready? I said, well, if you have a friend come, just acquaintance or friend come, and how comfortable your house is ready.
I guess the conclusion would be as presentable as possible. The better you can do, the better the experience, but you don't have to go as crazy as for the photos because, again, it's not going to be on the internet.
Yeah, they understand you live there. They understand you as an owner, you live there. But on the other hand, we have to show the house as better as possible, right? So if you make sure the house show well, we have a better chance to get better offers.
All right,
yes.
Very good. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after these messages. Okay, welcome back to our show. We're talking about the listing to selling process. So, Jane, at this point, we've covered the listing agreement sign, the scheduling, the accessibility issues, things to get the house ready for the showings, the photos. Now we're going to talk about one of your favorite topics, the open house.
Open house,
you just love open houses. I couldn't get away without seeing you talk about that, right?
Yes, absolutely. With the open house, right, there's a mix. Feelings out there. Some agent will tell the seller, you don't need an open house. I don't need, as an agent, listing agent, I don't need a business. That's for the agent to get a business. Open house doesn't work. To be honest with you, I feel differently. I think it's an opportunity for seller's agent to present the home to the potential buyer. Now, the gas price is so high, and plus the buyer from, out of state, different areas, right? And some buyers, they start searching with open house. They want to see themselves. If they like it, they call their agent, come back. But as seller agent, I personally believe open house definitely is useful to promoting our client's home. That's absolutely. With the open house, right, normally we do Saturday, Sunday, sometimes new listing Friday afternoon as well. So introduce the home. That serve few purpose. Number one, when you have open house, we are there to answer any questions buyer may have, because at the end of the day, we local expert. We know the area, we know the community, we know a lot of information. And secondly, that's provide the convenience to the buyer and the buyer agent. So they can just come, and the agent don't have the company, just send a buyer over here. We work with them so we can show the house, answer the question. The thirdly, even for the seller is good, because instead of have a private showing, one person, we can use 3 hours, time to go through quite a few groups to see the house. So that's really the benefit to all the buyers, all the sellers, and all the the buyer agent too. So that's really benefit all around. But the only thing is we are there to present, but that's our job. The seller trusts us with their home. The least thing I can do is to be the open house. So yes, absolutely.
Right. And even with all the advertising and the internet, and I bet if you did a survey, I bet a good percentage of homes are still bought at the open houses.
Yeah, they may not buy from the leasing agent. I mean, that's true. But they came to the open house because a lot of time, right, when I get offers in the past years, many years, it's not only during the pandemic, many years, when you look at the contract from time to time, you look at the agent name, you say, hang on a minute, that agent never showed a house. The seller sometimes call me and I said, no, they must come open house because some agent may not even come. So the buyer saw it and they just make offer. That's it. Some agent like myself, I would go back with the buyer one more time, at least to see the house to determine the offering price and point out the information. So what's important to the buyer. So in the future, so make the success rate is higher. Say if the older roof or older HVAC, I always point out when I show them, remember that, right? Your inspector going to say it's a lot of use life, but it's working, so you're not get a new one, so on and so forth.
Right.
So open house definitely helped with a lot of home selling process, in my opinion.
Right. So it's an efficient tool, and it can only help. It can't hurt because it's an added way to. It's an added marketing tool, and it's certainly to promote the home. And it's I think it's a win-win. It's a win-win for the buyer agent, the seller, the buyers, because everybody has a block of time. They know that they can come from typically like 1 to 4 p.m. on a Saturday or Sunday,
yes.
And then it's set aside. So and they can come with their agent, or they don't have to come with their agent. Then certainly the list agent will respect any buyer that is working with an agent.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's a win-win, yeah. So we've done all this. So you got the home exposed, you have it on the internet, you have it marketed, you have the open houses. The next thing would be, hopefully will come with all the fruits of the hard labor, will be offers.
That's right.
So, right. That's
when you have offers, and a leasing agent typically sit down with the owner or over the phone. So to go through each offer, hopefully multiple. Right. So go through each pros and cons and see. In my experience, the price is not the only criteria. You have to look at the terms. Like, for example, the home inspection and the appraisal issue, as you said before, Ken. I mean, a lot of time, right? It's two things: it's willingness and able. So the whole thing.
Well, let's talk about the offers. So let's say we're still getting multiple offers, which is still definitely prevalent in this even after the interest rates have gone up. It's still the house prices are stabilized, so you're still getting multiple offers due to the demand supply. So a lot of sellers probably have or potential sellers probably have the question, well, how do we handle multiple offers? Do we take the highest one? Do we go back to each one? Do we call for final and best? So there's really no one rule that satisfies all situations. It really depends, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. What that depends is what seller looking for. What is most important to the seller? Each individual seller is different. Some seller want the most number. Some seller want the closing date convenience. For example, they have a new construction or the certain date they want to reach that target.
Or some sellers might want a U&O where they can stay in the house post-closing for up to a month or 2 months until they're ready to move on to their next home, which could be a new construction or it could be out of state.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things involved. So, this today's overview. So if you have a question, please reach out to us. But giving us an overview, mainly your leasing agent will sit down with the seller to decide which one is meet the seller request the most.
Okay, let's move on. So let's say you've gone through the offer evaluation. They've accepted an offer. So they sign. So the seller signs it. It's already signed by the buyer when it's presented. They've got the mortgage pre-approval, everything, all the ducks in a row. And the next step, it goes to the attorneys in New Jersey, because basically once the real estate contract of sale is signed, it's not binding. It's legally binding in 3 business days thereafter, unless an attorney reviews and disapproves of the contract, which is that's called the attorney review process. So typically what will happen is it'll go to the buyer attorney, the seller attorney, and usually the buyer attorney will send out a disapproval letter saying that we disapprove of the contract in its current form. They'll send their letter or their amendment, and then the attorney review process will go back and forth between the buyer and the seller attorney.
Yes, and once again, we did a special session for that. But just for the audience to remind the audience, the 3 days is the 3 days to find an attorney. If you both sides don't have attorney, your contract stays in the form you signed. But in most cases, as long as you had attorney start the process, either one side or both sides, right, that break the days. There's no legal limit how many days, how long the attorney review
process can take. That all depends on the speed of the attorneys. And one very important point is the three business day count period for attorney review to start is when both the buyer and the seller have received the fully signed contract. Not the buyer's attorney, not the seller's attorney. Both the buyer and the seller must actually have received in hand a copy of the fully signed contract. There's been case law on that, Estate versus Priscilla, which determined that. It can't be the attorney, it can't be the executor. It's got to be the buyer and seller themselves. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. After that, once the attorney finished the review and satisfied, sign off, and the buyer will start the process. And
right. Well, then you have. I'm sorry to interrupt, but then you have a binding contract. So that means that basically then there's only limited circumstances where the buyer or the seller can break the contract and legally break it.
From today's purpose, we're talking from the seller perspective.
Right.
So obviously, the buyer going to do the home inspection, and which is what affect the seller is we have to make the home available. And after home inspection, and the buyer will make a request, we have to negotiate either with credit, repair, or bit of both. And that's really, and we had the session on that as well.
Yeah, or do nothing.
Or do nothing. Yes.
Because basically, that's
nothing.
in the COVID market, there was a lot of do nothing, or a lot of selling it as is, and the buyer was literally giving up their rights to ask for the more minor items. But now that it's coming back to more of a neutral market or buyer market, now it's going back to the conventional way the home inspections were handled, which was the if there was something
negotiate. I mean, it really depends on the circumstances. After that, the buyer generally apply the mortgage, and they have to do appraisal, and the buyer also have to get the title search going. So after that, the seller attorney will receive the title binder, and then to make sure there's nothing against the seller. And once we finish the home inspection and the contingency, we finish the the buyer got the mortgage commitment, and then.
But wait a minute, we should talk about real quickly, because the appraisal, that's an important thing. I mean, now it's more important because we're back to the normal standard market. The appraisal is an important thing. So from the seller perspective, your hurdle is obviously to get through the home inspection, which is negotiable, and depending if there's truly something major wrong, with the roof or the plumbing or the HVAC or the something
or the mold
mold, those are going to be recurrent issues. So it's likely you're going to have to address them now or later. But the appraisal is another hurdle, because the seller, you have to make sure it's important for the seller to know that the house appraises, because if the house under appraises, that could be an issue.
The buyer can come back and renegotiate.
Renegotiate, right. So that's another thing. So when you say what's next from the seller perspective, it's the home inspection hurdle, and then it's the appraisal hurdle, and then it's obviously the buyer side's ordering the title and the survey. So there could be issues that are uncovered by the title or the survey that could be, that need to be addressed. But those are more the legal issues. If there's something, an infringement on the property, or there's or the title reveals mortgages that aren't closed out.
Yeah. Or seller had a previous dispute with other party, they put on the title. So that's happened before.
Yeah, there could be liens.
Yeah,
right,
it can be lien on the title. Yeah. Once they're all done, and the attorney and the title company, both attorney and title company, ready to close, and just one thing, right? The seller attorney will prepare the closing document for the seller, and very important, the seller always asks me the question, do I have to be at a closing? Answer is no. And you can sign the closing document with your attorney before the closing date. And also, if you're out of state, a lot of our clients will move out of state, the closing document can be emailed to them. They can sign it with a notary. And before they overnight the documents back, I always highly recommend it. They take a picture or scan email to the attorney, make sure they sign it correct. I don't want you to spend money overnight back and then realize it was wrong, and then it will delay the process. So long story short,
just to clarify,
the seller,
Jane, though, that when you said the email, that basically the attorneys, if they're out of state, they can email them the documents, but the seller has to print them,
it.
then physically take the documents. We're not at the stage yet where they can email.
No, they don't accept that.
They don't e-sign documents
has
yet.
to be signed with a notary.
Yeah, the deed has to be signed with the notary. The seller's affidavit of title has to be signed in the presence of a notary public, and some of the documents, other documents just need signatures. But the deed.
The transfer of deed has to be
yes.
signed, and that has to be sent back to the original. Have to be overnight back, and if you sign with your lawyer will overnight that the closing documents to the title company.
Yeah, and the settlement statement, which is typically signed, which is the accounting statement, used to be called the HUD-1. Now it's called the closing statement. That's signed the day of the closing, and that can, for that document, they accept the facsimile.
Fax, email, e-sign, or that one either can be signed by the seller or by the attorney. So that one can be signed by the attorney. So that's not going to be issue. One last thing, very, very super, super important. Please, 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 please do not discontinue your electric and gas. Please do not do that.
Right, because typically the documents are signed in advance of the closing. Typically in this day and age, typically the buyer and the buyer attorney and the title company are physically present at the closing. But prior to the actual closing of title, the buyer will do at least a final walkthrough, and sometimes they do a pre-final walkthrough, maybe after the repairs are done on the home inspection. But the final walkthrough, the utilities must all be on. The house must be broom clean condition. All the manuals and whatever documentation that the seller has should be left in the kitchen in one of the drawers, and the garage openers, the extra keys, etc. And
the grass has to be cut too.
Or the snow has to be cleared.
That's right, both. And a few times, we had a snow day, and we have to make sure that.
And please, please, please keep the utilities on and keep your homeowner's insurance in place. And then until legally the closing of title has occurred, you get verification that it's done, and then the seller has their wire transfer or they've collected their proceeds, right. And then the post-closing would be basically then you want to cancel the utilities, notify your homeowner's insurance company to discontinue that service, and basically
go to the post office to register.
Right, and that should be you should have also changed your address. I guess we went a little bit, but then you're leaving off one very last step: celebrate.
That's right.
Pop the champagne.
That's right.
All right, we're out of time. We'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.